All right, welcome back. Happy to have you. Today we are going to start our BCBA exam prep. First things first, our task list. So today we are going to do part one of the BCBA 5th edition task list, which is foundations. Now, if you're taking your 4th edition exam, this is still helpful. The language, the concepts, everything's the same. It's just out of order. Okay, it's in a different order. So still useful. However, we are doing the 5th edition task list in this video. So we're going to do foundations first, which is the first part of the task list. It's our building blocks. It sets us up for the next part of the task list, which is some of the more complex ideas and thoughts that make up our field and make up being a BCBA. So I'm really happy to have you. Usually, you know me as the RBT exam review guy, but we are branching out because after helping RBTs pass, we want them to become BCBAs. I want you to become a BCBA. And so that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to walk you through the task list, simplify it for you, okay? Because in my opinion, simplifying it in a way that you're going to understand is the key to success on your BCBA exam, okay? So as always, any questions or comments, please email me or leave a question or comment below. This task list will be available for purchase next week. Okay, so be on the lookout for that. And then after we do our task list, we're going to start doing practice exams, just like we do for the RBT exam, just for the BCBA exam. Okay, so hope you enjoy. If you do, please like and subscribe. And let's just get into our task list. Okay, so where do we start? We start at A1, the very basics. Okay, what are goals of behavior analysis as a science? These are the basic concepts regarding observation of behavior and events. In ABA, as a BCBA, okay, your job is going to be observing behavior, events, and understanding how they relate to each other, understanding how you can control these behavior and events, and understanding how you can predict behavior and events, okay? So the 3 goals of observation, right, in ABA are description, prediction, and control. And description, okay, is our first goal. It's the lowest level. It's the most basic. Okay. It's simple observation. It's just facts about the event or behavior that are observable and examinable. So what does the behavior look like? What happens before, during, and after the behavior? Simply describing what went on. Okay. You went out with a friend or you went out with some friends and you're telling your other friend about it. You tell them where you went, who was there, what you ate. You're describing the event. You have a client, he hand flaps, you define the behavior as repeated movements of the hands up and down, lasting longer than 5 seconds. You're simply giving me facts about the event, okay? We're not talking about functions, we're not talking about why they occurred, we're just describing the events or the behaviors. Then we have prediction, okay? We are now predicting, right, what's gonna happen if something in the environment changes. So these are repeated observations that show 2 events correlate with each other. And that's the key here, right? These events correlate, but they don't necessarily causate, okay? There's no causal relation or functional relation, although one might be suggested, okay? So after repeated observations of the environment, you start to notice that certain things happen, okay, at the same time or near each other. So these events correlate with each other. Okay, we're one step closer to actually identifying a functional relation and actually identifying, okay, a causal relation. So for example, you know, if you leave at 7 a.m., you can beat traffic because traffic doesn't get bad until 7:45. Okay, traffic correlates with 7:45 a.m. Or you know, okay, from repeated observations that if you present your client with a task demand, they're going to attempt to elope from the room. You can start to predict these things happening, okay? So not only are we describing things, we're now predicting, okay? And as a BCBA, that's going to be one of your main jobs. You need to be a good predictor of behavior, okay? We can't always be certain that we have control over behavior or when a behavior is going to happen, but we have to be really good at predicting things, okay? If I do this in the environment, what do I predict will happen as a result? Okay, these correlations lead to our next item, okay, which is control, which is our highest level of understanding. when we have control and understanding of control, we know for a fact what stimuli and what variable is controlling our behavior. Okay, this is a functional relation between the IV and the DV. And that's the important part here. Okay, we have now demonstrated an actual functional relation. So prediction, right, is correlation. Okay, control, cause, functional relation. Okay, the highest level of understanding. We know if we introduce reinforcement, our independent variable, we're going to reliably increase our behavior, our dependent variable. We have control over increasing this behavior. Okay, you know, if you add pepper to your fries, your boyfriend won't touch them. Your boyfriend always eats your French fries. So what do? You add pepper, the independent variable, okay, and your boyfriend's behavior, the dependent variable, changes. You have reliable control over that behavior. Okay, so these are our three ideas, our three goals of science, right? We want to describe what happens. We want to be able to predict and hypothesize correlations. And if we do something in the environment, how is that going to change the environment? And then ultimately, we want to demonstrate control, okay, that we have control over our behavior. Remember, we are behavior change gurus, right? That's what you do as a BCBA. We're working to change behavior in meaningful ways. The only way we can reliably change behavior is to establish control over those behaviors. Okay, moving on. A2, we want to explain the philosophical assumptions underlying the science of behavior analysis. Okay, so how does the world work, right? These are all the things, the shared assumptions about how the world works as it relates to science. Okay, these are the ideas that are going to guide us, right, as we get into our actual practice of behavior analysis. Okay, so where do we start? We start with selectionism, right? Behaviors are selected, meaning you keep or get rid of them based on environmental factors, right? Do you need the behavior? Do you not need the behavior, right? It's simple selection, okay? Does this behavior functionally benefit me? I might keep it. Does it not? I might get rid of it. So our first type, okay, we have three types, is phylogenetic. So this is evolution, right? Survival of the fittest, Darwinism. If you survive, okay, the behaviors that led to your survival and help your survival, you're obviously going to want to keep, right? This is natural selection, evolution, okay, very basic. Those species that die out, okay, those behaviors naturally are going to be gotten rid of, right? So this is biological, okay, natural selection. We then have ontogenic, right, which is selection due to interaction with the environment. So that's kind of what we do, right? We manipulate the environment to keep behaviors or get rid of behaviors. Okay, so I can reinforce a behavior and increase it. I can punish behavior and decrease it. Okay, I'm starting to select behaviors based on my environment. And then finally, we have cultural, right? Behaviors pass from one person to the next. Okay, we learn from our parents, we learn from our grandparents. Okay, generation after generation. This is how our family acts. This is how our culture acts. This is how our group acts. Okay, so these are three ways behaviors are selected, all based on environmental factors. Okay, is that behavior benefiting us? Is it getting rid of something for us? Is it gaining something for us? Okay, are we being taught that behavior? Or are we being punished for that behavior? Okay, how is that behavior persisting? Okay, throughout our lifetime. Then you have determinism, right? The universe is lawful and orderly. Nothing happens accidentally, okay? If you are a BCBA, your behavior analyst, you never believe things happen on accident. Everything happens for a reason. There's always an explanation for events, okay? Coincidence, chance, randomness, okay? We don't take those into account. There's a reason something happened, okay? If a vase falls off the shelf and no one's around, there is a reason that vase fell off. If your client starts hitting themselves out of the blue and they've never hit themselves, there is a reason for that behavior occurring. The universe is lawful, it's orderly, okay? We can always explain why something happened. Okay. Again, there's no chance, there's no randomness. We go by the laws, we go by order, right? Why did that happen? We need to find an explanation. There is an explanation. Empiricism is the objective observation of events that are based on data. Okay. We are data driven. We do not make observations. We do not make decisions based on thoughts or feelings. We make them based on data. Okay. So we record data to determine the length of a behavior, right? I don't say, well, I think the behavior happens for 5 minutes. I get out a stopwatch and I'll record that behavior and I say the behavior happened for 4 minutes and 46 seconds. That is empirical, okay? I think 5 minutes is not empirical, okay? The BX lasted 4 minutes, 46 seconds, empirical. That is the difference, right? This is data. This is thoughts, feels, okay? You'll get a lot of parents who give you a lot of thoughts and feelings on how often the behavior occurs, why the behavior occurs, okay? And then when you actually take data, you start to see that the parent's input is not empirical, okay? It's based on biases, it's based on their thoughts, their feelings, okay? Their subjective opinion. We need to be objective. We need to be data driven. We need to be empirical. When we talk about using empirical interventions, empirically backed interventions, we're talking about data driven, proven interventions. Then you have parsimony. I think maybe the most important one, okay? The simplest and most logical explanation should always be considered first, right? There's always a simple explanation that we need to consider first. If your mom doesn't call you back last night, okay, we don't jump to the darkest, deepest tragedy, okay? We don't jump to the fact that they no longer love us, right? There's got to be a simple explanation for why they did not call us back, okay? Once we rule out the simple explanation, then we can get into other reasons. Same with behavior, okay? If your client all of a sudden throws their pencil across the room, okay, we don't jump immediately to some medical diagnosis, okay, or some horrible emotional state, okay? We simply look for the simplest explanation, okay? Maybe that math problem was too hard. Rolling out the simplest explanation first, okay, is going to make you a very good BCBA. It's going to help your decision making. It's going to improve your decision making, okay? We always look at the simplest, most logical explanation first. And finally, pragmatism. You analyze outcomes based on results, okay? Are our results useful or not? We want to produce meaningful, socially valid outcomes. Our outcomes need to serve a purpose. They need to improve the lives of our clients, okay? We need to see results, right? Additionally, they need to be based on the individual and they need to be data-based. We don't just use a recipe or cookbook for all our clients. Our clients are all individuals, okay? And we base our judgments, our outcomes, our results, our interventions based on individual needs, okay? We don't just use what worked in the past. You evaluate the interventions based on how that intervention impacts the client and the result of that intervention. Was it useful? Was it not? Okay, so these are our guiding thoughts, guiding ideas, guiding laws of science. Now we move into our perspective from the perspective of radical behaviorism, okay? So first, what do we have? We had methodological behaviorism, right? And then Skinner came along and made radical BX, okay? What is the major difference? What is the major difference between these two? Well, methodological behaviorism did not acknowledge private internal events as behavior, okay? We didn't take them into account. We didn't acknowledge them. Skinner came along and said internal events, okay, are behavior. These private internal events are behavior. They share the same characteristic as public events, okay? Even though emotions, thoughts, and feelings we can't see, we can't measure, they are actually behavior. Okay. So what is an example of a private event? Your feelings, your thoughts, emotions. Okay. If someone can't see you doing it, okay, it is a private event. Now, on the flip side, if you are home alone making a cup of coffee, is that a public or private event? That's a public event. Someone can observe you doing it. So even if they're not observing you in the moment, okay, it's still a public event. If they can see it, if I can observe it, if I can measure it, it's considered a public event. Private events, okay, are not observable and measurable, okay, through basic means, right? So, very important idea here, okay? Private events are behaviors, emotions and thoughts and feelings, okay? The voice in our head, same characteristics as behaviors, but what's the difference, right? Why don't we use those? Because we can't observe and measure. And that's the key, right? We only want to use behaviors we can observe and measure. So radical events, okay, radical behaviorism, although we acknowledge private and public events, we still only focus on these public events, okay? Because these are behaviors that are observable and measurable. These are what we can change and reliably track and take data on, okay? Okay, distinguish among our principles of behavior analysis, okay? I'm sorry, distinguish among behaviorism. So the 4 branches of behaviorism, okay? We have behaviorism, we have experimental analysis of behavior, applied behavior analysis, and practice guided by behavior analysis. So what's the difference? Well, behaviorism is kind of the umbrella, right? It's our guiding philosophy of behavior science. It just says there's an explanation for behavior as a result of interactions between individuals and the environment, okay? It's what we do every day. It's what we believe as behaviorists, okay? There's an explanation for behavior, right? We are looking at interactions between our clients and their environment, okay? Example, the client doesn't tantrum because they're mad. The tantrum was a result of environmental individual interaction. Here's the function, here's the reason, okay? It's our guiding philosophy. Then you have experimental analysis of behavior, okay? It's studying behavior principles, okay, that are not applied, right? So if you are EAB, experimental analysis of behavior, you might work with rats, okay? You work in a lab, you're examining behavioristic laws and principles, but you're not actually applying that research, okay? Someone else might take your research and apply it later, but experimental analysis is simply studying behavioral principles, okay, in an experimental setting and not applying it. So you work in a lab with rats, you do operant research on the rats, but you don't apply that research. Applied behavior analysis, we now take those principles, okay, so we've gone from EAB, lab, right, to ABA, let's say home, okay, and we're taking those principles we have from EAB, and now we're applying them, and we're actually researching the effects on human subjects. And that's what you're going to do on your clients, right? You are looking at the core, you're just examining the effects of your interventions on your clients, right? You examine the effect of extinction on client screaming. You examine the effect of punishment on your RBTs. You examine the effect of prompting on your client's ability to match to sample, right? We've taken all these behavior principles we learned experimenting in labs. We are now applying them through applied behavior analysis. Finally, we have practice guided by behavior analysis. This is more what technicians do, okay? If we are actually directly implementing interventions, treatments, this is the practice guided, okay? It's the result of behaviorism, EAB, and ABA, the result of this data, the result of our experiments, okay? It's the actual interventions we're using in the real world, okay? So if you look at it like this with behaviorism, okay, and then you have EAB, ABA, right? Those are our experimental. We're looking at the impact, okay, of our environmental changes on subjects in a lab and then actual subjects in the field. And then we take all of those, okay, and we practice. All right. So those are our 4 classes of behaviorism, okay? Essentially, 4 ways we use behavior and behavior analysis, okay, in life. So what we're doing as BCBAs, of course, is applied behavior analysis. Okay, describe and define the dimensions of applied behavior analysis, right? So we have 7 dimensions. My favorite acronym is BATCAGE, but you can use whatever you want. There are many, many out there. Okay, you need to know these. You will be asked about these on the test. They will ask you several questions about these on the test. You have to know these very well. Okay, so we have behavioral, applied, technological, okay, conceptually, systematic, okay, analytic, generality, okay, and then effective. So what do each of those mean, right? These are the dimensions that are guiding our practice, okay, BATCAGE. So start with applied, right? Changes are positive and socially significant. Change is meaningful. We never just change a behavior because it annoys somebody, okay? Or the parent just wants a change, right? If the parent asks you to teach their child, the Pledge of Allegiance, okay, is not necessarily what you're supposed to do, okay? Is that meaningful? Is it socially significant in the person's life? Okay, it's just going to depend, right, on the child's need, okay? If it's simply just what the parent wants, okay, and it doesn't actually impact the client in any way, okay, it might not be the best thing to teach them. However, teaching them to dress themselves, okay, teaching them to independently fix meals, right, clean up after themselves, okay, interact with others socially, okay, these are positive, socially significant changes in a person's life. Change is meaningful. That's what we're going for. So we always want to keep an open mind about behavior we're teaching, okay, because change on one behavior might be meaningful to that client, and we go to a different client, and that same change isn't as meaningful. Okay, remember, we're taking everything on a client by client basis. Everybody's an individual. Okay, we're only going by how it affects that individual person. Okay, analytic. A functional relation is demonstrated between what is changed in the environment and the behavior we want to change. Simply, do we have a functional relation? Are we controlling the behavior? Okay, we need to demonstrate functional relations. We need to demonstrate we actually have control over the behavior and nothing else in the environment is controlling that behavior. Okay, so if we implement a differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors, we need to show it's our DRA that's controlling the occurrence of behaviors and not anything else in the environment. Okay, the only way we can reliably change behavior is to demonstrate we have control. Okay, if we are implementing interventions and there are outside factors actually affecting the behavior, we're never going to reliably know, okay, if we're the ones impacting it. So our treatment needs to be analytic. We have to demonstrate functional relations. Behavior must be observable and measurable. This is the most basic one, right? This is the most obvious one. Everything we do is observable and measurable. Remember, we acknowledge private events, but private events are not observable. They're not measurable. We need to do public events. Okay, you can't measure thoughts and feelings. You can measure the outcome of someone's writing behavior. Conceptually systematic. Interventions should be consistent with behavior principles. Again, this should be obvious. If we're teaching imitation, we need to teach imitation through the lens of behavior principles. Okay, if you are going to teach the Pledge of Allegiance, right, and it is meaningful, we need to teach it using behavior principles, right? Reinforcement, punishment, extinction. Everything we do needs to be conceptually systematic, okay, consistent with what we know works in terms of behaviorism and behavior principles. Okay, our interventions must be effective. Okay, there must be social significant and socially important level of change to the behavior. Okay, you're actually changing the behavior, right? Don't get applied and effective mixed up. Okay. Applied means we're teaching, okay, what's important. We're teaching positive change. Okay. Change is meaningful. Effective means we're actually making change. Okay. So applied, you teach someone, your goal is to teach someone to dress themselves. Effective is we actually increased our client's ability to dress themselves to the point where they can do it fully independently. Okay. Our interventions are actually effective. So be careful with those two and don't get them mixed up. Generality, the target behavior should change not only in the learning environment, but outside of the learning environment as well. You all know what generalization is, hopefully, right? We want to demonstrate that whatever we teach in our clinic or in our home setting, once they're out of the teaching environment, they can now demonstrate that skill, okay, across multiple settings, times, okay, people. Generality is utmost important. It may be the most important thing, right? If we're not generalizing, we're not really doing our job. And finally, technological. Intervention should be replicable by anyone who reads the intervention. Meaning, when you write your treatment plans, when you write your behavior definitions, okay, you need to ensure that if you ever leave that case, or if someone ever takes over the case, someone ever fills in for you, they can look at your definition, they can look at your treatment plan, and they can replicate it exactly. Okay. Our clients move a lot. Okay. Our clients get transferred sometimes. We need to be sure that any intervention we use, okay, can be replicated by anybody reading that treatment plan. Technologically consistent. Okay. Very, very important. So remember, these are our dimensions, our 7 dimensions. Okay. I like Batcage to remember them. There's other ways you can use acronyms to remember it. Whatever works for you is the key. And that is just a general good rule to go by. Okay. When we're learning our BCBA exam, okay, when we're studying, there's no one way to do it. Okay. The way I passed my BCBA exam is different than how my friends passed their BCBA exam. Okay. Don't do it based on how other people do it. Do what works for you. However you're going to remember these things, you need to do that. Okay. This is the time to be a little selfish and focus on how you're going to exceed or excel on this exam. Okay. So whatever works for you, that's what you need to do. Okay. So that is A. We are now moving on to B, item B. Okay. We're going to start talking a little more about behavioral terms. Okay. Some of our technical language. Okay. Some of the basic definitions and concepts. All right. First things first, behavior, right? Again, this is all the easy stuff. As we build up, okay, towards the more complex stuff, you have to have a foundation, okay, to get to the harder stuff. So where do we start? Of course, the behavior, right? Behavior is anything an organism does. Behavior includes actions that change the environment in some way, okay? So an organism interacting with their environment and changing that environment, okay, in some way is a behavior, right? Talking, eating, writing, reading, okay? All examples of behavior, right? Very simple, very straightforward concept, right? You might have heard of the dead man's test. If a dead man could do it, it doesn't qualify as behavior. The best example here is non-compliance. Non-compliance is not a behavior, right? Non-compliance is doing nothing. A dead man won't comply with you, okay? Therefore, it's non-compliance. So again, behavior is simply anything an organism does, okay, interacting with the environment and sometimes changing the environment, okay? So we go from behavior to what? To individual responses, right? So response, response, response. These are single instances of behavior, okay? So we have our behavior. We know what our behavior is, right? Our behavior, let's say, is answering addition problems. Our response is answering 4 in response to 2 + 2, right? That's a single instance of answering problems, okay? So it is an important distinction to know on the exam, the difference between a behavior and a response. Behavior is our umbrella, response is a single instance of that behavior, okay? And then we have response classes, right? Response classes, okay, or a bunch of responses, okay, that all serve the same function, right? So a group or a set of responses, a group or a set of instances of behavior that serve the same function, right? That's important. We're not talking about the form. We're not talking about what these behaviors look like. We're talking about the function. For example, if I ask you what 2 + 2 is, you can write 4, you can say 4, or you can show me 4. All these responses serve the same function of answering the question, okay? Or you want a snack, so you scream, you hit, you headbang, okay? All of these responses serve the same function of gaining access to a snack. All right, so one more time, behavior, anything an organism does. We go down to responses, okay? These are single instances of the behavior. And then the response class, okay? A group or set of responses that serve the same function, okay? So pretty straightforward, pretty basic stuff so far, right? Now we're going to talk about stimulus and stimulus classes, right? So we have our responses and we have our stimulus, okay? These are very basic concepts in ABA. Remember, what's our 3-term contingency? Stimulus, response, stimulus. So it's important that you understand what these are and how they affect each other. So stimulus and stimulus class. Stimulus is a change in the environment that evokes a functional reaction, right? So our behavior and our response, right, was the reaction, okay? Our stimulus is the change in the environment, right? So we have a stimulus that leads to what? A response, okay? It evokes a functional reaction. Remember, behavior is determined. Behavior happens for a reason. Whenever someone is doing something, they're trying to gain something, get rid of something, communicate something, okay? A stimulus that evokes a functional reaction, there's a reason for it, okay? Example, the entire class is talking loudly. The teacher walks in the class quiets down. What's the stimulus? Okay, the teacher walking in the class, the response is the class quiets, okay? Or you're excited about your date, right? You receive a text message canceling your date, okay? The stimulus evokes some sort of response. The stimulus of the text message is going to evoke a response from you, okay? It's just a change in environment that evokes this functional reaction, okay? So what is a stimulus class, right? Similar to a function or a response class, except we're going by, okay, similar characteristics, okay? So we have a bunch of stimuli, okay? All our stimuli here in this little bubble, right? And they share similar characteristics. So they can look alike, right? They have a similar form, right? They look alike, they sound alike, okay? Look alike, right? That's one way. Or, right, functional, right? They affect behavior same way, right? So the teacher walking in the class quiets the class down. The intercom coming over the loudspeaker and the principal making an announcement quiets the class down, okay? A loud boom of thunder, okay, quiets the class down. These are all functional, okay, stimulus that have the same effect on a behavior, right? The stimulus class of form, they all look alike. So blue items, right, all share physical characteristics that look similar, right? And then finally, temporal, right, where the behavior occurs in relation to the behavior. So antecedents, okay, stimuli that come before the same behavior, right, are all temporal, okay? Consequences that follow a behavior are all temporal, right? So antecedents and consequences are our temporal stimulus class. So 3 different types, okay? Stimulus and a stimulus class, stimuli and a stimulus class, okay? Tongue twister, share common characteristics, either by form, by function, or temporally, okay? And then probing, which is kind of an afterthought because we all know what probing is, right? You're simply asking a client to perform a task to assess whether they perform that task, okay? All right, Define and provide examples of respondent and operant conditioning. Okay, so what is the difference between respondent and operant conditioning? First off, you should know this. We deal in what? We deal in operant conditioning. Okay, respondent conditioning is what? Respondent conditioning is stimulus reflex, right? So you have, pepper, you sneeze, right? Sneeze, okay, scream, sweat, heart rate, okay? All these reflexes, we don't control the reflexes, okay? This is respondent conditioning, right? This is the classical Pavlovian conditioning, okay? A key here is this. Respondent conditioning elicits a reflex. Operant conditioning evokes a response. Those words elicit and evoke are key, okay? You need to understand that elicit goes with respondent, evoke goes with operant, okay? On the exam, they are going to be picky about that, right? You want to make sure, okay, if you're answering a respondent question, you're using elicit and not evoked, okay? They're very particular about that. So how does respondent conditioning necessarily work, right? We have unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned responses, neutral stimulus, conditioned stimulus, conditioned response, okay? So if we have an unconditioned stimulus, which is, snack, right? And then an unconditioned response, which is salivate, okay? So we take our neutral stimulus, which is our bell, we pair it with our unconditioned stimulus of snack, okay? And then we have our unconditioned response, which is salivate. That bell becomes a conditioned stimulus, okay? And then salivate becomes a conditioned response, okay? If you understand that, you understand operant conditioning. Unconditioned stimulus elicit unconditioned responses. When you pair a neutral stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus, okay, we get that unconditioned response, and we create a conditioned stimulus, which elicits a conditioned reflex, right? So the wording is important, okay? It is important. Now you can say unconditioned response, it's fine. They are actually reflexes, okay? But the most important word there is elicit, and understanding how that pairing process works when you take unconditioned stimuli, pair it with neutral stimuli, and we get this conditioned response, which turns in this unconditioned response, which turns into a conditioned response. And then operant conditioning, okay, is what we do. And that is taking the simple stimulus response contingency and adding what? Adding consequences, right? So we take SR and becomes SRS, right? So our antecedent, our behavior, our consequence, okay? We evoke responses, okay, with operant conditioning, right? We evoke responses, right? And then we reinforce or we punish. So example, you select blue when told pick blue. The consequence is you're given a Skittle. In the future, you select blue, okay? Consequences affect the future probability of a behavior occurring or not occurring. That's really important, okay? Consequences affect the future probability. Consequences do not affect current behavior. Consequences affect future behavior, okay? Operant conditioning is what you really need to know. It's what we do in ABA, okay? But you just need to understand respondent conditioning and the role it plays, okay? And that idea of pairing those neutral stimuli with the unconditioned stimuli to get conditioned responses. All right. B4, very basic stuff. Define and provide examples of positive and negative reinforcement contingencies. Hopefully, you know these things by now, okay? I assume you do, but let's go through them very quickly, okay? What is reinforcement? right, increases behavior. Okay, very simple. What is positive? Add behavior. Okay, what is negative? I'm sorry, add stimuli, right? Add stimuli. Negative, remove stimuli. Okay, and we have positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. Okay, positive reinforcement, we're presenting a stimulus following a response that increases or maintains that response. Negative reinforcement, stimulus removed following a response that will increase or maintain that response. Okay, the basic stuff doesn't change just because it's the BCBA exam. Reinforcement is the same. Reinforcement increases behavior. Punishment is the same. Punishment decreases behavior. Positive means we're adding. Negative means we're taking away. Okay, very, very simple still, right? We have two types. Okay, we have unconditioned reinforcement, our primary reinforcers. Okay, food, water, sleep, sexual activity, shelter. No learning history is needed to understand we need these items. Conditioned reinforcement. Okay, these are neutral stimuli that become a reinforcer through learning. So token boards, money. Okay, we condition all types of reinforcers. Okay, they take on these reinforcing properties and they change behavior. Okay, and then a generalized conditioned reinforcer or a generalized reinforcer. Okay, a reinforcer that has been paired with other reinforcers and can be used in a variety of contexts. Again, tokens are a good generalized reinforcer. Praise is a good generalized reinforcer. Okay, what's a contingency? A contingency is an if-then statement. I'm moving through this section quickly because you should know positive, negative reinforcement. If you don't know reinforcement and punishment, you need to go back and review that. Okay, that's very basic stuff, right? That you should know by now. Okay, define and provide examples of schedules of reinforcement. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky, right? We all know the basic schedules, right? We have our fixed ratio, right? Our variable ratio, fixed interval, variable interval, our very basic schedules, right? Fixed ratio 1 is our continuous schedule. Ratio is based on responses. Interval is based on time, right? Fixed means it's set. Variable, it's an average. Okay, these are our very basic schedules of reinforcement. This is what we use. Okay, this is what RBTs need to know. They're basic schedules. Typically, token boards, things like that, are on basic schedules. Now, for the BCBA exam, okay, you need to know a little more, right? We have complex schedules. Okay, complex schedules give people a lot of trouble, right? So don't worry if you don't understand this on the first go around. Okay, complex schedules can be tricky. Just remember, okay, we have 7 complex schedules. Okay, so we have our complex schedules. Okay, and they're broken down in pairs. Okay, except for concurrent, which is by itself. Multiple, mixed, okay, go together. Chained, tandem, go together. Alternative and conjunctive go together. The reason these are paired, okay, is because typically an SD is either present or it's not. Okay, so SD here, right? No SD. Okay, chained, SD here, tandem, no SD. Alternative, right, is either. Conjunctive is and. Okay, so these schedules are the same except these minor differences. There's either an SD or no SD, and then alternative conjunctive is going to be either or and. Okay, so very basic way to look at it to begin with and why they're broken down like they are. Now let's understand them a little deeper. Okay, what are we actually looking at here? Let's start with concurrent. Okay, concurrent is 2 or more basic schedules for 2 or more behaviors at the same time. This is matching law. Okay, so you choose the schedule with the quickest or best reinforcement. Okay, so if it takes me, so if I, want to go to my friend's house, all right, and I have to ask mom 3 times before she says yes, and I can ask dad 1 time before he says yes, what's the quickest way to get reinforcement? Well, it's just to go ask dad that first time. Okay. Concurrent is simply matching law. Two more basic schedules for two or more behaviors at the same time. The learner is going to choose the schedule with the quickest or best reinforcement. Okay. Okay. Multiple and mixed, right? We have two or more basic schedules in an alternating sequence, right? So these are existing at the same time, but they're alternating, okay? Sometimes randomly, right? So multiple, there's one or more behaviors, and an SD is signaling what schedule is available. So if first time around, okay, E receives a break, okay, for FR3, and the worksheet is the SD, okay. Second time around, E receives it after a VI 10, okay. Cleaning is the SD. 3, if we present cleaning, okay, what schedule are we getting? E is getting VI 10. Cleaning signals, okay, that schedule of reinforcement is up, right? These schedules are alternating, okay, but in multiple, right, there's an SD present. For mixed, it's the same idea. Two schedules alternating, sometimes randomly, but now there's no SD, okay? So, for example, right, there might be one or more behavior, okay, but, right, you have reinforcement for either VR3 or VI4. There's no SD saying what's available, so the learner is just working, okay, and one of these schedules is available, okay, at that time. Like I said, can be a little tricky at first, right? Once you understand them, though, they're very easy, very basic, very easy to understand, okay? Our next two are chained and tandem, two or more basic schedule requirements that occur in a row. So multiple and mixed, right? These are alternating, okay? Chained and tandem, they occur in a row. The chain has to be completed. Both schedule requirements need to be completed before you receive reinforcement. So again, chained, okay, SD is present. So for example, you sprint, okay, and your reinforcement is 30 seconds. Sprinting is the SD. You walk, okay, your schedule is FI 90. Walking is the SD, okay, and then you receive reinforcement. You have to complete the sprinting and you have to complete the walking before you receive reinforcement. Those things happen in a row, okay? So you sprint, you walk, and then you get a drink of water. You sprint, you walk, you get a drink of water, okay? These are successive schedules that occur in a row, and then you receive reinforcement, okay? What about tandem? There's no SD, okay? So tandem, no SD, okay? That could be, you have schedules FI 6, okay, and then FR 4, right? These schedules are occurring, okay? They're both occurring. You have to complete them both, okay? But there's no SD showing you what schedule is present at any given time. So in this case, you would produce 4 responses after 6 minutes, okay? All schedules need to be completed and chained in tandem, right? They all need to be completed. Chained is just simply they are completed in an order. There's an SD with a clear order, okay? Tandem, okay, all need to be completed, but there's no clear order or SD. And then finally, alternative or conjunctive. Alternative simply means either or behavior must happen to get reinforcement. So you either complete 50 math problems or you wait 5 minutes. Conjunctive and or both behaviors need to be completed to get reinforcement. So you have to complete 50 math problems and wait 5 minutes. So again, this gives people a lot of trouble. I think concurrent is the easiest to understand. It's just matching law, right? 2 or more behaviors for 2 or more schedules. You're going to choose the schedule and the behavior that gets you the reinforcement the quickest. I think alternative and conjunctive are very easy to understand. Alternative, okay, either or behavior must happen to get reinforcement. Okay, so there's 2 or 3 or 4 behaviors, right? One of those behaviors must happen. Conjunctive, both behaviors need to get happen to get reinforcement. Okay, you have to complete 50 problems and then you have to wait 5 minutes. I think multiple mixed chain tandem give people a little more trouble. Okay, that's okay. Understand the basics, right? Come back to it if you don't truly understand it right now. Okay. Once you start doing the questions for these multiple complex schedules, it's going to make a little more sense. Okay. So don't panic just yet. All right. Provide examples of positive and negative punishment. Again, going to go through this quickly. You should know what punishment is, hopefully, right? Punishment does what? Punishment decreases behavior. Positive punishment, the addition of a stimulus. Okay, let's just say a stimulus added. Okay, stimulus added following a response for that behavior that will increase or that will decrease, right? Decrease. Sorry, there's a little carryover from the reinforcement. Positive punishment is a stimulus added following response that will decrease or maintain response. Negative punishment, okay, removed that will decrease or maintain that response, right? So punishment decreases, right? Same thing, positive added something that decreases, negative taken away something that decreases. We have unconditioned punishment, no learning history needed, pain, heat, electric shock, conditioned punishment, timeout, reprimands. Okay, and again, a contingency is an if-then statement. Again, going through punishment and reinforcement quickly, those are very basic concepts that I'm sure you all know. All right, what is the difference between automatic and socially mediated contingencies? Surprisingly, this one is sometimes confusing, okay? But once we talk about it, I don't think you'll ever miss it again. Automatic, okay? Remember, automatic is one of our functions, right? And when we describe a function, the behavior as being automatic, it means it occurs whenever, wherever, okay, with nobody around. Okay, it can occur with nobody around, right? And that's the key. Automatic, right? You don't need anybody else to deliver reinforcement, okay? One learner, okay? No one else, right? So it's one person, no one else with the reinforcement. Socially mediated, okay, is obviously different, right? A additional person delivers reinforcement. So 2 or more individuals, okay? So again, automatic, your consequences produce reinforcement or punishment without needing another individual to change the environment. Socially mediated, okay, the consequence is delivered through another individual. Very basic, okay? It's exactly what the term says, right? Socially mediated, the punishment, the consequence, the reinforcement is going to be delivered by another person. All right, define and provide examples of operant extinction. Extinction, again, very basic concept. What do we know about extinction? Extinction is the reinforcement of a previously reinforced behavior is discontinued, right? So we have a behavior in the past that's been reinforced. You asking for a snack, okay? Your client used to hit their mom, okay, to gain a snack. And every time the client hits the mom gives them a snack. We put the behavior on extinction. Now, when your client hits their mom, we don't deliver the snack. That's extinction, right? I think we all know what extinction is. Extinction burst is the predictable temporary increase in intensity of behavior during extinction. Spontaneous recovery is a sudden reemergence of a previously extinct behavior. So if we were to chart that, okay, what would that look like? We would have our behavior, okay, being reinforced, okay? And we say right here, we're going to put the behavior on extinction, okay? What's that behavior going to do, right? It's going to start to go up, okay? Because it's not being reinforced. We're going through the extinction burst, right? And then what? Going to decrease, okay? And then it's going to get down here for a little while, okay? And then what might happen? It might suddenly spike again, and that's spontaneous recovery, okay? Extinction, very straightforward, very simple, right? One of the most basic concepts you're going to encounter on your BCBA exam, okay? However, you still do need to know it, still important. All these basic stuff, they're still ask you about because, again, it's our building blocks, it's the foundations, okay? The foundations are just as important as anything else. Okay, stimulus control. What is stimulus control? Behaviors occur or don't occur in the presence, okay, of a stimulus, right? So, for example, right, in the presence of a football game, you're going to speak very loudly. In the presence of a library, you're going to talk quietly, okay? Whenever your college friend comes in town, you tend to drink and party more, right? And you kind of revert back to old behaviors. Your college friend has stimulus control over these behaviors, right? You stop at red lights. The red light has stimulus control over you stopping. You accelerate for green lights. Green lights have stimulus control over you accelerating, okay? If the teacher says everybody put their heads on their desk, you put your head on your desk, okay? The teacher's instruction has stimulus control. Stimulus control is what we talk about when we say instructional control, meaning in the presence of us, okay, we can get our clients to do things for us, okay? Behaviors and responses occur or don't occur only in the presence or more often or less in the presence of a stimulus, okay? We're just talking about having control over a behavior through some sort of stimulus, right? You're making coffee, okay? The timer beeper goes off, you know the coffee's ready, okay? So you go get the coffee. That beeping has control over you walking over to get the coffee, okay? Stimulus control, not too tricky of a concept, right? Just think about stimulus or the change in the environment. What happens to my behavior in the presence of that stimulus, okay? If it's, again, reliable and predictable, we can say that stimulus has stimulus control over your behavior. Okay, discrimination, generalization, and maintenance. So differential reinforcement, okay, which we're going to talk about in part 2, okay, is what, right? Reinforce one behavior, reinforce one response, everything else is on extinction, right? And what does this lead to? It leads to discrimination and differentiation, right? Discrimination is the ability to identify or distinguish between stimuli. Differentiation is the ability to change responses, okay? Differential reinforcement teaches both of those. So when we're discriminating, okay, and we have the square, the triangle, and the circle, if I'm teaching discrimination, what am I going to do? Well, if I say touch square, okay, when am I delivering reinforcement? Only for touching square. This one gets extinction. This one gets extinction. That's discrimination, okay? It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. You are reinforcing the behavior you want to see in the presence of an SD, okay? You're teaching your client to discriminate, okay? Then we have generalization and maintenance. Remember, generalization is one of those 7 dimensions. Very important. Generalization is the occurrence of a behavior outside of the learning or teaching environment, okay? So we have several examples of generalization. It can occur across settings, right? It can occur across people, materials, behaviors, time. You know, school is a great example, right? If we teach somebody something in our clinic, when they go to school, it needs to generalize across multiple teachers, multiple environments, okay, multiple times a day, right? Generalization is so important. If we're not generalizing, okay, we're not doing our jobs well enough. We have to plan for generalization from the beginning. As a BCBA, you should have a generalization plan in place for every intervention, okay? So what types of generalization are there? We have stimulus generalization and response generalization. These two, again, can be a little tricky. Just remember this, okay? Stimulus generalization, right? We have one response across multiple stimuli. Response generalization, so this is STEM. Response is, okay, the opposite, right? You have one stimulus, okay, evokes multiple responses. Okay, so the arrow should really be this way, right? One, make that a little clearer for you. Okay, so you have multiple stimuli, okay, evoking a single response. Generalization. Stimulus response generalization is one stimulus, okay, evoking multiple responses. So stimulus generalization, when a stimulus has a history of evoking a response that has been reinforced in its presence, the same response is evoked by a stimuli that shares similar physical properties. So remember that stimulus class, right? They share similar properties of the controlling stimulus, okay? So a child screams, right, when they see a white rat, okay? So a rat evokes screaming, okay? Bunny evokes screaming, okay? Mask evokes screaming. All these different stimuli, okay, evoke the same response. This is stimulus generalization, okay? Response generalization, you have one stimuli. So let's say you have a couch, okay? You can sit, you can lay, you can stand, okay? You might teach someone to sit on a couch, okay? And now they're laying on the couch, they're standing on that couch. They have generalized their response, okay? Response generalization, when a person performs a variety of functional responses in the presence of the same stimuli. So again, a little confusing at first, okay? Understand that stimulus generalization is one response across multiple stimuli. Response generalization, okay, is one stimuli evokes multiple responses, okay? Start there. That's going to be the easiest way to remember it at first, right? Again, once you start doing questions, once we start doing questions on this stuff, it's going to make a lot more sense. And then finally, maintenance. What is maintenance? Maintenance is the ability of a behavior to persist, okay, once teaching stops. So if we learned math, years ago, we learned basic addition years ago, and it's not like we're being taught or working on addition constantly, but our ability to do basic addition problems has maintained throughout the years, okay? How do you mediate generalization and maintenance? We're going to go more in depth into this, okay? In section 2, we get really deep in the weeds on this, but you train loosely, right? Multiple exemplars, multiple settings, people, stimuli in a natural context. You use a variety of reinforcement schedules, teach self-management, okay? Reinforce generalization when it happens, okay? Run maintenance drills, right? Occasionally ask them to do a behavior that's no longer taught, but you want to make sure it's maintained, okay? Many ways to generalize, many ways to maintain. We will get more in depth in those in part 2. All right, motivating operations. Again, something that gives people a ton of trouble, okay? Start here, right? What is our contingency? MO, SD, response, consequence. That motivating operation comes before our SD. Okay, what does the motivating operation do? The motivating operation alters the value of a consequence. so the effectiveness of a reinforcer or punisher, okay? And it can alter the frequency of a behavior that is being reinforced in the past by that consequence. Put it this way, the MO, okay, makes you want or not want something, okay? It makes those consequences more valuable or less valuable through satiation and deprivation, okay? You're getting too much of something, okay? You're gonna want it less. You're not getting enough of something, okay? You're gonna want it more. MOs alter the value of our consequences, okay? So what are our consequences, right? Consequences come after the response. The MO is altering the value of this, okay? The SD, what does the SD do? The SD signals this is available. That is the difference, okay? Our MO, we might want something very badly, but until there's an SD saying it's available, we can't get access to it, okay? So if you're driving down the highway, right, and you see a sign for chips and guacamole, right, that sign is the motivating operation. It increases that value of chips and guacamole, right? Now we want that chips and guacamole. Until we see the restaurant, right, with the chips and guacamole, there is no SD, okay? The MO is simply making that reinforcer more valuable, okay? We're now hungry. We haven't had food in a while. We see that billboard. We really want chips and guac, okay? So there are two types of MOs. We have MOs, okay? We have EO, establishing operation, AO, abolishing operation. EO increases the value or effectiveness. AO decreases, okay, the value or effectiveness, okay? EO is based on deprivation, okay? The consequence increases in value as you withhold that item. AO is based on satiation, okay? So a very common motivating operation manipulation intervention is non-contingent reinforcement. If your client is attention seeking, we give them non-contingent reinforcement. It acts as an abolishing operation, okay, for engaging in attention seeking behavior because we satiate them on attention, okay? So you then have evocative effects, okay? So increase frequency, okay, evoc, okay, and then abative, right? Decrease, okay? As that reinforcer becomes more valuable, okay, the frequency of that behavior from that same motivating operation increases. So for example, on this end, okay, you typically drink 1 cup of coffee when you need to stay awake. During exam week, staying up late is more valuable, okay? It's increasing the value. So you're drinking 2 to 3 cups of coffee, okay? The value of staying up late is much more important, right? You drink more cups of coffee. Abative, right? You always try to do 3 pages of writing in the morning. On vacation, you only write 1 page, okay? The completion of those 3 pages is less valuable on vacation, okay? Those are MOs in a nutshell. MOs increase or decrease the value, okay, of a consequence, and they can evoke or abate a behavior, okay? MOs tricky at first, right? Everybody struggles at first. Just understand an MO makes you want or not want something, okay? It doesn't say it's available. It just increases or decreases the value of the consequence, the reinforcer, or the punisher, okay? So for the exam, you need to know these conditioned motivating operations. We have 3 types, okay? We have reflexive, we have transitive, we have surrogate, all right? Reflexive CMOs, CMORs, okay? It's a stimulus that gains motivating operation properties. It signals a situation is getting better or worse. It comes before the situation, okay? So this type of MO signals a situation is getting better or worse. What do MOs do? it increases or decreases the value of, okay, the consequence. For example, if you pull out the homework folder, that situation is now getting worse for your client. The value of escape for your client increases. Escape might be the reinforcer, the value increases, okay? A reflexive CMO signals a situation is getting better or worse. It comes before the situation. A transitive CMO is a stimulus that establishes or abolishes the need for another stimulus, okay? If I'm given a piece of paper, that establishes the need for a pencil. The value of a pencil goes up. If I'm locked outside of my house, that establishes the need for a key. The value of the key goes up. If I'm making coffee in the morning, right, and I put the filter in the pot, and the value of the coffee grounds go up, okay? Transitive CMOs establish or abolish the need for another stimulus, right? So think of two items. One item makes the other item more valuable, right? Putting on socks makes shoes more valuable, okay? Needing to cut makes scissors more valuable, okay? Wanting to saute a dish makes a pan more valuable, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, surrogate, a stimulus is paired with another motivating operation and gains its properties, okay? So we take a neutral stimulus and we give it the properties of a motivating operation, okay, from another motivating operation. So for example, you get tired at 9 p.m. and go to bed around 9 p.m. Today you drink coffee and you don't plan to sleep until midnight. However, at 9 p.m., the clock shows 9 p.m. Now sleep is increased in value. That clock has gained motivating operation properties, okay, from sleeping, okay. Motivating operations, tricky, okay. Stimulus response, generalization, tricky. Two more of the more difficult, quote unquote, basic concepts, right? It's okay if you want to come back to these after you've done other parts of your study, okay? After you've done other questions, right? These things can be difficult, right? However, you still want to understand the basic ideas behind them, right? Okay, moving on. Rule-governed and contingency-shaped behavior. Rule-governed behavior, okay? Behavior that is under the control of a verbal three-term contingency or rule. So consequences do not govern rule-governed behaviors, right? You see a sign that says no loitering, right? That's a rule, okay? You don't eat expired food because you know you could get sick. That's a rule, okay? Your mom tells you don't talk to strangers, right? Because you'll get kidnapped, right? That's a rule, okay? Your boss tells you you have to stay into the office till 5, okay? That's a rule. Behavior is under control of a verbal contingency, okay? Or a verbal rule, right? You wear a collared shirt to a fancy restaurant because the sign says no t-shirts, okay? You haven't necessarily violated any of these rules before. No consequences are maintaining your behavior, okay? But there's a verbal contingency in place and your behavior is under the control of that verbal contingency. So think about people who are strict rule followers. They never meet the consequences of those rules, and yet they still follow them, okay? Contingency-shaped behavior is the opposite, right? Behavior is under the control of consequences, right? When you arrive to work at 8 a.m., you find fresh brewed coffee. You now get to work at 8 a.m. every day, okay? Your behavior is under the control of finding that coffee, right? Contingency-shaped behavior is what we deal in most of the time, right? Our ABC behavior. We provide reinforcement, we provide punishment, we provide a consequence, okay? We're trying to increase or decrease the occurrence of that behavior in the future, okay? So that's rule-governed versus contingency-shaped behavior. Okay, verbal operants, verbal behavior, right? This is our only section on verbal behavior, okay? Verbal behavior is not too difficult, I don't think, right? A lot of people already know or familiar with verbal behavior because we use the language all the time in practice, okay? So let's go through it, right? Mand is probably the most common. What is a mand? A mand is a request, okay? Here are the important parts, right? You need to know, okay, what evokes the verbal behavior and what reinforces the verbal behavior. Okay. So for a mand, okay, it's a request made by a speaker. A mand is a mand, okay, evoked by MO, right? If you want something, okay, that's a motivating operation at play. A mand or request is evoked by the MO. You're hungry, you ask for a snack, right? You're sick of working, right? You ask for a break. Okay, these are evoked by MOs. A mand is reinforced by the item, meaning whatever request is made, you reinforce a mand by granting that request. So if we're teaching mand, we're mand training, whatever request is made by the client or whoever, we reinforce the mand by providing the request. Okay. A tact, right? Simply a label. Okay. You're driving down the road, you see a cow, you say cow. Non-verbal SD. All right. Reinforced, generalized, conditioned reinforcer. A generalized conditioned reinforcer means praise, tokens, whatever, right? Any sort of reinforcer can reinforce a tact. A tact is a non-verbal, it's evoked by a non-verbal SD, meaning when you say, hey, what is that? And someone answers a cow, that is not a tact, okay? A tact is evoked by a non-verbal SD. You're simply looking at something and labeling something, okay? That's a very important distinction. A lot of people think a tact is me asking you to label. It's not. It's you looking at something, you labeling something, reinforced by a general condition reinforcer. Echoic. Okay. Evoked. Verbal. SD. Okay. Reinforced. Generalized conditioned reinforcer. What is echoic? Echoic is repeating what someone said. Okay. Repeating the phrase, repeating the word, right? I say touch your head. The client says touch your head, right? I say don't copy me. You say don't copy me. That's an echoic. It's evoked by my verbal SD. It's reinforced by a generalized condition reinforcer. Okay. Now the new concept that's important to know, okay, is the idea of point-to-point correspondence. Okay. And formal similarity. Okay. Formal similarity means looks the same. Okay. So an echoic is spoken, right? The SD is spoken. The echoic is spoken. Okay. They have formal similarity. Point-to-point correspondence means they're identical, right? So an echoic has point-to-point correspondence. An echoic has formal similarity. What I say, you copy exactly, and it's both spoken. Point-to-point means identical. Formal similarity means it looks the same or it doesn't. Okay. So those are mand, tact, echoic. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. Similarity. Right. Now we're going to move on to intraverbals, textuals, and transcriptions. Okay. So intraverbals, right? Intraverbal, right? These are our conversations. These are our back and forth, our questions, okay? The speaker responds to another person in conversation, evoked by verbal SD, okay? Social reinforcement. Intraverbals are conversations, right? They're responding to other individuals in the environment, okay? This type of idea, okay? So the waitress asks you, what do you want to eat? You say a hamburger, okay? I say, what color is the sky? You say blue. That is an intraverbal, okay? Social reinforcement is how we reinforce this behavior. Intraverbals, okay? No point-to-point correspondence, okay? May have formal similarity, okay? Meaning, very important here, if I say point to blue and you say point to blue, is that an intraverbal or an echoic? That's an echoic because it has point-to-point correspondence. It's identical. It has formal similarity, okay? Both spoken. If I say point to blue, okay, and you ask, where is blue? That's an intraverbal, right? Evoked by our verbal SD. There's no point-to-point correspondence. The response is different, okay, than the SD. There's formal similarity, but that's okay. It might have formal similarity, it might not, right? If I ask you, where are you going? And you say, to the mall, okay, there's no point-to-point correspondence, right? There's formal similarity, but that's okay in the intraverbal. The social reinforcement is me saying, okay, or acknowledging your response, right? That's the difference between the intraverbal and the echoic. The echoic is going to be identical, okay? The intraverbal is responding, okay, to a verbal SD, but there's no point-to-point correspondence, okay? It's going to sound different, right? And there may or may not be formal similarity. Intraverbals are more conversation, right? Okay, textuals. What is a textual? Text is just simply reading, right? You read a sign, you read a books. A good way to remember it is you read a text, okay? Evoked non-verbal SD, okay? Point-to-point correspondence, yes, okay? No formal similarity. What does that mean? That means point-to-point correspondence, okay? Whatever that sign, that book, or that text says, when you read it, okay, you're reading it exactly the same. It's going to be identical, okay? But it's not going to be formal similarity, right? If I'm reading a text out loud, there's no formal similarity between that typed text and my spoken language, okay? Generalized condition reinforcement, right? Then finally, transcription, okay? Writing something down, what is spoken, okay? It's evoked by verbal SD, okay? Yes, point-to-point correspondence, no, the formal similarity, okay? So those are our verbal operants. You need to know what evokes them, what reinforces them, okay? Do we have point-to-point correspondence, right? Do we not? Because that's going to help you answer questions on the BCBA exam, okay? And this last one, this autoclitic, right? It modifies other verbal behaviors. So if you're tacting, right, you see a cow, you say cow. An autoclitic would be you adding I see, okay, or I hear, or I think, right? You're just adding things to your already existing verbal operant. So again, verbal operant, what do we need to know? We need to know what evokes, what reinforces, point to point, and formal similarity, okay? If you understand those and you understand what each one is, you're going to do just fine with verbal operants. I think verbal operant questions should be automatic, yes, automatic corrects on the exam, okay? You don't want to miss the verbal operant questions. Finally, for B, derived stimulus relations. This is a simple concept, in my opinion, that gives people too much trouble, okay? People don't understand what these stimulus relations are, what a derived stimulus relation is. All this means, okay, it's an untrained, so we're not teaching a relationship between stimuli. So when a stimulus relationship is formed that we don't teach, okay, we're using stimulus relations and stimulus equivalents. If I teach you, okay, to match a picture of a dog to a picture of a dog, what am I teaching you? I'm teaching you that those two pictures of dogs are the same, okay? I then teach you to say dog, okay? And now you know that picture of a dog is a dog. And then we go outside and you see a dog running down the street and you say, oh, look, a dog. I did not teach you that the dog running down the street was a dog, but you've derived that from what you did learn. That's stimulus equivalence, that's stimulus relations. That's all we're talking about here, okay? Don't get hung up on reflexivity, symmetry, and transitivity. It's very easy, okay? So RST, okay? RST. Reflexivity is the basic one, okay? A equals A, okay? Pick equals picture, okay? Picture of the dog equals the picture of the dog. Simple matching exact samples. Symmetry, A equals B and B equals A. So picture equals word, okay? Word equals picture, meaning the picture of the dog equals the written word or the spoken word of the dog, okay? So now we have symmetry, matching samples that aren't exact, but are still the same thing. And then we have transitivity, okay? A equals B, okay? B equals C. You are going to derive from this, right? A equals C. This is stimulus equivalence. This is the highest level of stimulus relation, okay? So the pick equals the word equals the real dog. We now derive that the pick equals the real dog. That's simple, guys. Very simple, okay? When you get this question on the test, please write it out. You have so much time to take your test. Use that time to your advantage. Don't rush, okay? Especially on these questions, you get paper and pencil. Write this stuff out. If you write stimulus relations out, you can never miss it, okay? It's super simple. It's that simple. All we're doing is deriving these relationships between stimuli that are untrained, okay? Again, another example. You see a picture, okay, of a piece of pizza, right? You know the spoken word pizza represents that picture, okay? And when you order a pizza from a different place, all those things are the same. The picture is the same, the word is the same, the actual piece is the same, okay? It's all we're talking about. How are these stimulus related, okay? Are they exact samples that aren't exact, okay? Or are they derived from one another, okay? Don't miss stimulus relation questions. Don't miss verbal operant questions, okay? The motivating operation questions can be difficult. Those can be too tricky, okay? You want to make up those points if you don't understand that somewhere else, okay? All right, let's move into C. Establish operational definitions of behavior. So when we establish operational definitions of behavior, what are we doing? We're describing exactly what you intend to measure. Okay, BCBAs, one of your primary jobs is describing operational definitions, right? What does it look like? Okay, what's the function? That's the two most important things: topography, function. And you want to be specific. You want to be complete. You want to be clear. You want to be concise. You want to be specific. Why is it happening? What does it look like? Okay, operational definitions, very straightforward. All right, distinguish among direct, indirect, and product measures of behavior. We have three different ways to record behavior data. Okay, we have direct, where you're observing the target behavior as it happens. You're actually with the person, the learner, the client, and you're taking data on that behavior as they engage in the behavior. Okay, so you're taking frequency data, you're taking continuous recording data, you're observing the target directly. Indirect, okay, you're not observing the behavior, you're getting subjective information, okay, interviews, checklists, rating scales, surveys, okay, not as accurate, not as reliable, not as valid as direct, right, but still a way to record behavior data. And then permanent product, you're measuring the outcome of the behavior. So again, you're not directly observing the behavior as it occurs necessarily. You're just looking at what the behavior produced, okay? And you're measuring the result, the product, the outcome of the behavior, okay? Okay, basic continuous reinforcement measures here, right? This is stuff that you should all be familiar with already, okay? Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. So let's just go through it pretty quickly, right? The important thing here is we have our dimensions, okay? 3 dimensions, okay, of measurement, all right? We have repeat ability, okay? We have temporal extent, okay? And we have temporal locus. Each one of these represents a certain dimension or certain type of measurement, okay? It's what you want to be familiar with, right? So, for example, how many times a behavior occurs is considered repeatability. Count, rate, and percentage is part of this repeatability, okay? Because we are looking at what? We are looking at the count. We are looking at, again, how many times a behavior occurs. Frequency is you just taking tally marks, okay? Behavior occurs 5 times. That's a count. That's your frequency. That's your repeatability, right? We want to make that what? Rate. So we need to add a time component, 5 times per session. This is our time, okay? Now we have rate, right? Frequency over time. And then finally, percentage, okay, is a rate or a number and an amount per 100, okay? So if I engaged in behavior 5, okay, out of 10 times, my percentage is 50%, okay? So this is the dimension of repeatability, right? Our occurrence of repeatability, very straightforward, count, frequency, and rate. Then we have temporal extent, okay, which is duration, how long the behavior lasts. So behavior starts, okay, behavior finishes, 5 minutes. That's our duration, okay? That's our temporal extent. Our temporal locus, where the behavior occurs at a certain point in time. That's latency in IRT. So latency is what? The time between the SD, okay, and the start of the response is latency, okay? The time between the response 1, response 2, response 2, response 3 is IRT, your inter-response time. That's the difference there, okay? We have our SD to our start of the response is latency. The time between responses is IRT. This is locus, okay? This is extent, okay? You might already know that, right? These are pretty basic measurement concepts, but the addition here for the BCBA exam is the repeatability, temporal extent, temporal locus. So be sure you know that. All right, measure the strength of the behavior. What does it look like? This is the form of the behavior. Form differs from function, okay? Function is Y, form is looks, okay? They differ, right? So with our form, we have topography, what the behavior looks like, okay? The client struck me with an open palm, making contact with my shoulder, and not describing why the behavior happened. It's simply what it looks like. Magnitude is the intensity or severity of the behavior, okay? The client engaged in protest, low intensity, okay? The client engaged in severe tantrum behavior today, right? How impactful was it, right? Was it extreme? Was it, was it very hard to manage, or was it just very subtle, very low key type of behavior, okay? Measuring the strength, the topography, the magnitude is the form of the behavior. It differs from the function. Trials to criterion, okay? The number of opportunities needed to achieve a predetermined level of success. Very simple, okay? My mastery is 8. 8, 8, goals, whatever. Okay, 8 goals is mastery. Okay, so I give you the ball and I say I need you to score 8 goals. Okay, you miss your first one, miss your second one. Okay, you make 4 in a row, miss the next one, you make 4 more in a row. How many trials to criterion? Well, how many trials did it take to get to 8? It took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11. That's our trials to criterion. Okay. Very simple, very straightforward. Do not overcomplicate these things. Okay. That is key. All right. Sampling procedures. We just went through continuous measurement. Okay. Continuous measurement is frequency, rate, duration, latency, IRT. Okay. We are now looking at sampling. Okay. Which is discontinuous. What is the difference between continuous and discontinuous? Continuous measurement, we record every instance of behavior. Okay. Discontinuous, okay, we're only recording certain times, certain instances of behavior. Sampling, interval recording are discontinuous measures. Okay. What is interval recording? An interval is a specific length of time when data will be taken. Okay. So if I'm taking data 5 minutes and I'm taking an interval, right? I might have 1 minute intervals. Okay. 30-second intervals, right? It just depends. These intervals make up this bigger chunk of time. Okay. We have different ways of doing it. We have partial interval recording. That is, if the behavior occurs at all during the interval, it is a response. If I have 1 minute intervals, okay, and my behavior occurs for 40 seconds, okay, partial interval would say this is a response. Whole interval would say no response, right? Whole interval, it has to happen the entire time. Momentary, okay, would depend on if the behavior occurred at the very end of the interval. So at 1 minute, did that behavior occur? Did it not? That would be momentary time sampling. Okay. Okay, so that's our partial interval. That's our whole interval. That's our momentary time sampling. Partial, if the behavior occurs at all during the interval, it's a response. Whole interval, the behavior has to occur for the entire interval to count. Momentary time sampling, the behavior happens at the end of the interval. So again, if I have a 1 minute interval, and that behavior occurs for 10 seconds, okay, and then doesn't occur for 30 seconds, and then occurs for 20 seconds, and at the very end of the interval, okay, that's a response. That's momentary time sampling. Okay. So this is discontinuous measurement, meaning if we have a 8-hour school day, I might only be taking this type of measurement for 20 minutes a day. Okay. Finally, play check is a planned activity check. You record the number of participants engaged in the activity at the end of an interval. So you have a 5-minute interval, right? At the end of that interval, you look up, 8 out of the 10 students are engaged in the work. Okay, you mark down 8. It's a planned check just to see who's engaged, who's not. Continuous measurement is great for one-on-one. Discontinuous is great for group settings. Okay, evaluate the validity, accuracy, and reliability of measurement procedures. Data must be accurate, valid, and reliable. What's the difference here? Okay, accurate means collected data reflects what was measured. Okay, so accuracy is important, right? If I'm recording frequency on data of blueberries eaten, the client eats 10 blueberries, okay, and you record actual, right, actual 10, and you record 10, your data is accurate, okay? If you record 30 blueberries eaten, not accurate. That's accuracy, right? whatever you're recording, okay, your data is actually reflecting what happened, okay? If you're accurate, you're actually indicating what actually happened, okay? Very simple. Valid, the collected data is taken for the correct behavior. Meaning if I ask you to record, okay, how many balloon animals the clown makes, right? And you end up recording, how many times your client, looked at the donkey, right? You're not recording what the target behavior is, okay? I want you to record the clown making balloon animals. You recorded your client petting the donkey. We're clearly at a circus here, okay? That data is not valid. We didn't take data on the correct thing. That brings us to our next point. Can data be accurate but not valid? Of course. If you accurately record the number of times our client pets the donkey, okay, that might be accurate, but it doesn't make it valid. The same token, if you record how many balloon animals the clown makes, but you don't record it correctly, well, it's valid and not accurate, okay? Finally, the data needs to be reliable, meaning that data needs to be produced over and over again, okay, when that measurement system is used. So if you record 10 balloon animals, okay, day one, right? If we use that same measurement, okay, we need to record the same number of balloon animals using that same measurement, okay, over and over and over again, right? If they record 10 balloon animals the next day, we should see 10 balloon animals the next day, okay? Data needs to be accurate. It needs to reflect what was measured, and it needs to be valid. It needs to be taken on the actual behavior we're targeting, and it needs to be reliable, it needs to be repeatable. Again, data can be valid and accurate and not reliable. Data can be reliable and accurate and not valid. Okay. It can be accurate but not valid or reliable, et cetera, right? The goal is to make it accurate, valid, and reliable. Okay, select a measurement system to obtain data given the dimension of behavior and logistics needed, right? So I just talked about this a lot, right? We want to choose appropriate measurements based on accurate, valid, reliable data and our resources and our circumstances surrounding the behavior. So continuous measurement is the truest form of measurement. We're going to capture every instance of behavior. However, it may not always be possible given our time or resource constraints. Okay, so if I've got to worry about 10 kids in a classroom, I might not be able to continuously measure all the behavior. Maybe I use discontinuous measurement. I only capture some instances of behavior. Okay, so it's not as true as continuous measurement, right? But it's useful for group settings or when recording for a short period of time. And then event recording is just how many times a behavior occurs. A very simple method of recording behavior. Okay, there's a clear beginning and an end, right? It's bad for behaviors that are ongoing or continuous. All three are valid. All three are useful. All three serve a purpose. Okay, it's going to be up to you as the BCBA to decide when should I use what measurement based on my resources, my time, my goals. All right, graphing, everybody's favorite part, graphing data, okay? Graphing data is an essential part of visual analysis. What is visual analysis? Visual analysis is looking at graph data and making determinations. So you're going to see in a couple minutes when I talk about variability, how visual analysis can change person to person. And while it's not entirely accurate, it's what we use in ABA to look at our data and make decisions and draw conclusions from our data. Visual analysis is the primary method of data analysis in ABA. So let's start here. Equal interval graphs, okay? Graphs where the distance between two consecutive points on the X and Y axis represents the same value, okay? That's just a technical definition of an equal interval graph, okay? Don't worry about it too much. How do we graph? First, we have to collect data, right? We need our participants, target behavior phases, basic stuff, right? Gather everything, all the information we need. Then we're going to graph it based on how we want to analyze the data. So similar to the way we choose a measurement procedure based on our time and resources, our needs, we're going to choose a graph based on our time, resources, and needs. Here's the thing though. A line graph is probably going to be used more often than not. A line graph is the most common form of graph in ABA. A line graph is what you see here, okay? It is a continuous, right, data path. So a line graph could look like this, right? And then you have a change line, right? All our data points are connected except across the phase changes and condition changes, okay? Y-axis, X-axis, title, okay? Time goes here, behavior goes here. Line graph, right? Most common graph used in ABA, data points are connected. I think we're all pretty familiar with the line graph. It gives us a good indicator of how our behavior relates to the passage of time. Again, the x-axis represents the passage of time, and the y-axis represents our behavior. Okay. A bar graph, rectangular bars, okay, are used to indicate a cluster of data, so to speak, right? So I might have a bar graph like this, and it's letters chosen. Okay. My bar graph would be A, B, C. A was chosen this many, B, and then C. Okay. So 2, 5, 3, right? 5, 3, 2. That's a bar graph, right? We're just correlating the data, okay, to the number chosen, right? And our options are down here. Okay. Bar graph, again, not really used that often to evaluate data. Okay. You might occasionally, but typically you're going to use a line graph. Okay. Cumulative record. Okay. Cumulative record is the Skinner method, right? Cumulative record is a continuous and ever increasing data path that accumulates data as data points are recorded. Cumulative records never go down. Okay. So if you see a graph and it does this, and it goes down, not a cumulative record. Cumulative records never go down because they continue to accrue or gather the data points in an ever increasing fashion, right? So it might look like this, but it's just going to keep going up as those data points are added. It's ever increasing. Important, a steeper slope represents an increased response rate. On the exam, they might ask you, based on this cumulative record, right, what can you say about the response rate? And if you have a steep slope, okay, high response rate. Why would that indicate a high response rate? Well, okay, at 200, right, we're here, and then bam, we shoot up in just a short amount of time to 300. So there was about 100 responses in that little bit of time. Okay, a steeper slope represents an increased response rate. And then a scatter plot, distribution of data points across a data set. Okay, a lot of times we use scatter plots to represent time of day. Okay, situation, environment, right? X and Y are relative to each other, so X occurs during Y. The most common, again, is what time of day the behavior occurs. Okay, this scatter plot is comparing miles per gallon versus city miles per gallon versus highway. They're relative. Okay, so a car might get 20 miles in the city, but 30 miles on the highway. That scatter plot is going to put a point at 20 and 30. Okay, semi-logarithmic graph, a standard acceleration chart, is used by Ogden Lindsay, okay, in precision teaching. It indicates fluency. Okay, that's what you need to know about a semi-logarithmic chart. Those are our basic graphs. You're going to be using the line graph 95 to 99% of the time. Okay, be familiar with the other ones, understand how to read them, understand any important concept behind them. Okay, but overall, you don't need to know too much about the individual graphs. Okay, understand what the semi-logarithmic graph came from, which was Ogden Lindsay, okay, used in precision teaching. Okay, this is what I was talking about, interpreting graph data. Okay, interpreting graph data via visual analysis. Visual analysis is us looking at this chart and interpreting this chart. Okay. So there's three ways we can talk about it. We can talk about level. We can talk about variability. We can talk about trend. Let's start with level. What is level? Level is the height of the data points. Okay. So my level here, right, is here, right? You can see it goes right in the middle of our data points. Okay, right at the average. This is our level. The level is very high. We change our phase and my level drops, right? Now my level is here. Okay. That line is our level. Level can be low. It can be moderate. It can be high. Okay. We're going to look at the level change when we change intervention, then we introduce different variables. Okay. And we can say our level, the level of data changed. It went from a high amount to a low amount. Okay. That's level. Let's look at variability. Now, variability is the variation between our data points. I said low variability for all of these. You might look at these and say, A, you think is high variability. That's one of the issues with visual analysis, okay? There's a level of subjectivity to it that can't be removed, okay? So let's look at a very clear-cut example, okay? This type of data, is that low or high variability? It's low, right? The data is very consistent. The range of data points from the highest to the lowest is not large at all, okay? Variability is very low. What about this variability? That's high, right? The highest data point over here to the lowest, data is just bouncing around all over the map. Very, very high variability, okay? Very easy to determine what the variability is, okay? This graph that I've used is a lot more challenging. I might agree that A could be considered high variability, okay? It just depends on who's doing the visual analysis, right? What you need to understand is what variability is, and it's the amount of variation between data points, the range of data points around the average. And then finally, trend, okay? The direction the data path is heading on the graph, right? So you can see A is no trend. There's no clear up or down, increase or decrease. B is decreasing, okay? Because if you were to draw a line, the data is slowly going like this. A, no trend. And then B, again, no trend. So for a much clearer look at it, okay, if we had data doing this, it's trending upwards, obviously. What about this? Trending downwards, obviously. So you can have upward trend or increasing, decreasing trend, no trend, right? Depends on what the data points are telling you. I use these graphs specifically to emphasize that visual analysis can be subjective in a lot of ways, okay? But you're gonna have to make a decision based on the information they give you on the exam about level, variability, and trend, okay? So you need to be prepared to do those things. Okay, our final section of part one is single subject design, right? Single subject design. I feel people now overstudy single subject design, and it becomes very easy for them, and they can sometimes neglect other things. So just because we don't use single subject as much, right, and you might not be as familiar with it, okay, don't spend all your time on it and neglect other important concepts, okay? So with that being said, single subject design is our form of experimentation in ABA. Single subject design, the subject acts as their own control, okay? They're small contained studies, right? We're systematically manipulating variables during this experimentation. So what do we have? We have independent variables and we have dependent variables, okay? What is the independent variable? It's the variable being manipulated, right? IV, manipulate. So you're adding, add, remove, change, okay? Anything you're adding, any variable you're adding, removing, changing, that's going to be the independent variable. Okay. When we're dealing with behavior, our interventions are independent variables. What does the independent variable impact? The DV. The dependent variable is dependent on the IV and other factors. Okay, independent variable exists on its own. Dependent variable is dependent on other factors outside of itself. Okay, so dependent variable might be the behavior of interest, right? The example I use, the soup is the dependent variable. The flavor of the saltiness of the soup is dependent on the salt. Okay, IV is manipulated, DV changes or depends on outside forces. Confounding variables, okay, can impact the DV during the experiment. Variables that you did not know existed and were not meant to impact the DV, okay, but they impacted them anyway. A confounding variable is not your independent variable. The independent variable is what you're manipulating, but a confounding variable can still impact the dependent variable. When do we say we have experimental control? We have experimental control when the IV controls the DV. So when we can add and remove the independent variable and reliably change and manipulate the behavior, we have experimental control. We are trying to prove experimental control because that gives our experiment legitimacy. Okay, when we prove our manipulation is changing the dependent variable, we have experimental control. So when we're doing our experiments, we want to find both internal validity and external validity. Internal validity is us saying we are certain that our changes, okay, that our DV changing is a result of our intervention or our manipulation. Meaning internal validity says my IV, okay, is what is changing, okay? My IV changes, controls the DV, okay? That is internal validity. Nothing else, no confounding factors, okay? Confounding, okay? No outside variables, okay? It's our IV controlling the DV. That is internal validity, okay? External validity says the results of our experiments are going to be generalizable to other subject settings and behaviors. So just because we can do it in a lab setting, will those results actually manifest outside of that setting? Okay, how valid are they outside of the experimental design? Okay, identify defining features of single subject experimental designs. Okay, D4 also says use what are the advantages, what are the purposes of single subject. Okay, the advantages are resources. Okay, it takes less resources, it takes less time. Subjects can be compared against themselves. Okay, those are our advantages. Okay, so again, individuals serve as their own control. Results of each condition are compared to their own data, right? So each individual are just compared to themselves. Okay, that's what it means by serve as their own control. Okay, prediction, verification, and replication. Okay, what does this mean? So prediction. Prediction is the hypothesis related to what the outcome will be when measured. Okay, what do we predict the outcome is going to be? Okay, so if we look at baseline A, okay, and baseline B, our prediction for baseline is that it would continue here if nothing changed. Our prediction for treatment B is it would continue here if nothing changed. And then again, our baseline, our prediction is here if nothing changed. So the green dots, okay, are our predictions. If nothing were to change, okay, we predict that our outcome will continue to go that way. Okay. Verification, okay, is proving our prediction, right? So our baseline here is verified here. Okay. We verified our prediction by withdrawing it, okay, we verified our data points. And the replication, okay, is kind of like verification, but now we're showing that our intervention is working. So here's our treatment 1, treatment 2. We've replicated this data path, okay, across multiple phases, okay? So prediction, again, is the green dots. We predict baseline continues, we predict treatment continues, we predict baseline continues. We verify our baseline from baseline 1 to baseline 2, and then we replicate our treatment from treatment 1 to treatment 2, okay? Very simple, very straightforward, right? Prediction, verification, replication. All right, single subject experimental designs. Everybody's favorite topic, right? Let's start with the most basic kind of experimental design, the most common kind, okay? The one we're probably all the most familiar with is our reversal withdrawal ABA design, okay? What are we doing? We are recording a baseline. So I take my baseline data, right? My A. I introduce an IV, an independent variable here. Boom. Data. I withdraw that IV. I go back to baseline. So no IV, no IV. Boom. A, B, A. What are we demonstrating? We are demonstrating experimental control. What is experimental control? Experimental control says our independent variable is the one thing controlling our behavior or our dependent variable. How do we prove that? Well, if we look at our baseline, behavior is down here. When I introduce my IV, behavior increases. When I remove my IV, behavior decreases again. So you can withdraw as many times as you want. The more you withdraw, the stronger your experimental control, okay? What are some advantages? Obviously, demonstrating experimental control is the best way to do it. Disadvantages: some behaviors can't be reversed. If I teach you to read, it's going to be difficult withdrawing my intervention because once you learn how to read, typically you're going to continue learning to read, right? Sometimes it can be unethical. If I'm dealing with self-injurious behaviors and my intervention works, is it appropriate to remove that intervention? Okay, so there's going to be advantages, there's going to be disadvantages. Multiple baseline, okay? Multiple baseline designs are used to analyze independent variable effects across settings, participants, and behaviors. So we have our multiple baseline design here. So if we look at it like this, okay, where we have our baseline, okay, baseline here, and then we start our intervention here, okay, and then our baseline for setting 2, right? And then our intervention here, okay, and then finally our final baseline goes here, okay, and our intervention, okay. So this can be settings, setting 1, set 2, set 3, can be behaviors, behavior 1, behavior 2, behavior 3, or participants, okay. So what are we doing? We're taking baseline. So for, let's say, setting 1, we take baseline, okay, for all 3 of our participants, all 3 of our settings, and we only introduce, okay, 1 intervention at a time, right? So put another way, okay, I'm taking baseline, okay, for 1, 2, 3. I now intervene, okay, so enter the independent variable for 1, continue taking baseline on 2, 3. Then we do independent variable 1 and 2, then baseline for 3. We want to see, right, is our independent variable affecting the behavior, right? We can show that if our baseline doesn't change as we introduce independent variables across these different participants, okay? if our behavior starts to change across other baselines without independent variables, okay, we might say something else is happening, something else is impacting the behavior, okay? What are some advantages? There's no withdrawal, okay? You can examine multiple dependent variables at the same time. Some disadvantages, okay? There's no experimental control necessarily, okay, because you're not withdrawing anything, right? So we can say, okay, we have experimental control. It's just much harder to prove with a multiple baseline. A multiple probe is just like a multiple baseline, but you're not taking continuous baseline, okay? You're just probing out individual instances of behavior. So this might be a multiple probe, okay? Intervention starts. Okay, your probe over here, intervention starts. Okay, you can see how our data paths are not connected because we only have 2 data points here, 3 data points here. This is our probe design. We're only occasionally probing instead of taking continuous baseline data. Alternating treatment design, rapid and random or semi-random alternating conditions, okay, 2 or more, are present during measurement, okay? So you can see here, right, we have no intervention and we have story mapping, and we're alternating those rapidly. So we're looking at number correct versus days. So the first day, right, we get 4 correct. Self-questioning comes into play, we get 6, right, 6, go back down to no intervention, okay, no intervention. We're rapidly alternating these conditions to see the effect each has on the behavior, okay? So if we're doing that over here, right, and we're gonna do, introduce blue and red, for instance, right? We might have blue here, and then red, and then blue, and then red, and then blue, and then red. Okay, I'm just alternating to see the impact that these different treatments have on our behavior, okay, relative to our time. So it can be 2 or more, as many as we want, okay? What are the advantages? Again, no withdrawal, all right? Multiple dependent variables rapidly. You can try out multiple dependent variables very quickly together. However, you have to be careful about carryover effect, okay? Once you start introducing interventions, learning might occur, and it's going to affect your data. If we look at our graph here, we can see there's a clear split, okay, between story mapping and no intervention. But as our participant learns, okay, the data kind of starts growing with each other, okay? It's still not the same, right? But here he has a giant increase, okay, in learning, right? So we have to be careful about carryover between alternating DVs. The longer we go on, the harder it's going to get to determine what actually is impacting that behavior, okay? And then changing criterion design, okay? We start a baseline. This is our baseline, okay? Baseline here, right? And then treatment is delivered in a series of ascending or descending phases meant to increase or decrease a behavior already in the learner's repertoire. That's very important. Our behavior is already in the repertoire that we're teaching, okay? When we deliver our treatment, we're trying to increase or decrease, okay? So you can see over here, we just call these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, our changing criterion is this line, right? That is the criterion we need to continue to meet minutes of exercise, okay, in each individual phase, right? So at first, my criterion is 10 minutes. Once I master that, I have to go to 20 minutes. I master that, we go to 30. I master that, we go to 40. I master that, we go to 50. Our criterion for mastery continues to change as we master, okay, the prior one. You can also decrease that. So if we're trying to decrease drinking, we're trying to decrease smoking, this stair step can go down instead, okay? You can test for experimental control in your criterion, okay, by reversing the criterion. If we went from 40 minutes required back down to 30, okay, and the data continued to show 30, okay, we could establish some sort of experimental control that way. So again, what do we have? We have our reversal withdrawal ABA, okay, simply recording a baseline, introducing an IV, withdraw the IV, baseline again, okay, very simple. Multiple baseline across people, participants, and settings, right? You're taking continuous baseline until you put in your IV, okay? This is our IV. But you still take baseline down here until the IV is introduced, okay? Alternating treatment, rapidly and semi-randomly alternate conditions, okay? You can see there's no phase change because we're not changing phases, we're not changing, okay, anything except the intervention, and we're randomly going back and forth and then changing criterion. We have a baseline and then we're setting levels to increase or decrease behavior, okay? These get very simple once you start to do them. You might have to read them on the exam. Sometimes they'll combine, okay, them together, right? Which is what I think becomes more tricky. But if you understand what each one is and each one looks like, okay, that's going to be no problem for you. Finally, describe rationales for conducting comparative, component, and parametric analysis, okay? Comparative analysis, you're simply comparing two different types of treatments, okay? A DRO to a DRA, right? Reinforcement to punishment. The package, they're not part of a package. We just want to see which one is more effective. When we get to component analysis, okay, component, we're comparing individual parts of a treatment package, okay? So a very easy way to remember this is medicine. We have Advil, okay, we have cough medicine, okay, and then we have, I don't know, blood pressure meds, okay? A component analysis, we are going to see which one of these, okay, is impacting the behavior change. What medicine is actually making a difference on our target behavior, okay? So for instance, if our target behavior is pain, right, we want to know, is the Advil helping the pain? Is the cough meds helping the pain? Or are the blood pressure meds helping the pain? How can we do that? Well, we can do a dropout analysis where we present this entire package together, okay? And then one by one, we start removing them. So this might be our package one, all three. Package two might just be Advil and blood pressure. We would look at the behavior, we would look at the pain, okay? If the pain stayed the same, we would reasonably rule out the cough meds weren't the thing that was affecting the behavior or the pain. We would drop out another one, just the Advil, right? And repeat, okay? We can also do an add-in analysis, okay? Each component is analyzed before the package is delivered. So we look at Advil first in relation to pain. We look at blood pressure meds in relation to pain. And then we look at cough meds individually, okay? And then we combine them into one, okay? So that's our component analysis. We're looking at what medicine. Now, it's just an example, right? In a component analysis, if you're using a combination of functional communication training, a DRO, and a punishment procedure, you might want to see which one of those procedures are actually impacting your behavior change. The idea is the same. This is just an easy way, I think, for you to remember it. So component is type of med, right? Type of med. Parametric is how much of one med, how much. So we determined that the Advil, right? We have Advil, cough, blood pressure, and we determined the Advil was the one that was controlling behavior. We now want to know how much Advil. 1 Advil, 2 Advil, 3 Advil, all right? So how much of a value do we need? Okay. What dosage is appropriate? Component is what medicine or what intervention. Parametric is what dosage or how much of that intervention is needed. Okay. All right, great. I'm glad you were able to join me. Okay. I'm going to put timestamps below so you have access to whatever you need to jump around to. Next week is going to be the second part of the task list, okay, where we're going to go into some deeper concepts and ideas. Any questions, any comments, please email me. Please leave them below. Good luck studying. Pretty soon, over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to have practice exams out for you. We're going to start doing questions together. So I'm looking forward to that. Make sure you like and subscribe. Turn your notifications on so you can see all of those. Keep studying hard, and I'm going to see you soon.